Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending. I'm Nguyen, and I'm here with Sharks for Kids. So today we have a great panel, and we're going to be hosting, some amazing individuals. I'm going to turn it over to each individual. Everybody's showing themselves. This is awesome. Great, great. Yes, amazing. Thank you so much. So at this time, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce you to our wonderful panel. So first of all, we have Dr. Romina Henriquez, who is a Marie Skłodowski-Curie Fellow at the Technical University of Denmark. You'd go ahead and want to tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, that will be me. I'm Romina. I'm Portuguese originally, and I am currently a postdoctoral fellow in Denmark. I work on genomics and evolution of marine fishes, and I'm currently working on sharks on the short fin mackerel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So next, we have Miss Carlee Jackson, who's a recent graduate, actually. So congratulations and so forth. Thank you. Nova Southeastern University. Took some classes there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just graduated this summer, defended my thesis in a pandemic. Very proud of myself. But yeah, so I am currently in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, so up where the cold is. But my current research, or my research that I've am starting to continue from my master's research, looked at the effects of tourism on nurse sharks in Belize. So just looking at the ways feeding tourism affects their behavior, habituation, and their movement around that area.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Toggling between a lot. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Miss Rose Santana, who is at FIU, Florida International University. You're a lab manager. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about that?
There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Rose. Yes, so I'm currently the lab manager at the Ecotoxicology and Risk Assessment Lab here at Florida International University. And my research focuses on looking at how metal contaminants affect fish behavior, primarily top predators. So for my PhD, I'm actually thinking of including sharks in that and looking at how the synergistic effects of metal contamination, which is a pretty big thing here in South Florida, and climate change is going to affect the top predators and what that's going to do for the community and the ecosystems at large. So, and I'm originally from Dominican Republic, so I'm a little bit away from home, but I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. All right, and last but not least on our panel, we have Clemency White, who is a PhD candidate at University of Exeter.
Yeah, hi, my name's Clemency. I'm actually from England, but I joined you today from the Bahamas. I'm based in Bimini in the northwestern Bahamas. I'm at the Bimini Biological Field Station where I'm doing the fieldwork for my PhD, and I primarily study how noise affects sharks. So both how sharks use sound to locate habitat, behave and move, but also how man-made noise might be kind of interfering with those interactions. So yeah, I'm very happy and excited to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So again, toggling between individuals. Okay, please. So again, I'm Nguyen. I'm actually here in New Jersey, actually, and joined by some of my students right now. I am actually teaching in New York City of marine science. Marine science is my background as well and my forte. So again, on behalf of Sharks for Kids, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the time to share your experience and so forth. So how we're going to go go about sharing today is we have some questions that we're going to pose to the panel. So our first one right here, our question is, what path or paths led you to be where you actually are today? And feel free, anyone at any point in time, if you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute and share. I'd love to hear from everyone.
Well, I can start because I'm a geographical incongruence. So as I said, I'm Portuguese. I was born in a small town in Portugal, no sea in sight. But I kind of always wanted to be a marine biologist. So I did an undergraduate study in Lisbon, in Portugal, the capital, on marine studies. And of course, you know, when you get to university, you get exposed to a lot of subjects that you might not know in high school. So then I discovered genetics and conservation genetics. And I thought that was a really good tool for conservation and management. So that's in my master's, I start going into a hybrid between the lab and the field. Because, you know, when you're a little marine biology, you're always at the beach. And I ended up being the marine biologist that is always at the lab. So, so then I did a master's in Lisbon as well. After that, I went to the UK, to London, to do a PhD. And I did all my field work in Angola and South Africa because I was working in the Benguela current, which is a cold water current in Southern Africa. And after that, I lived in South Africa for 5 years, and now I'm in Denmark. So I'm a bit like a fish, I migrate a lot.
Oh, you want to go, Rose?
No, you can go. You can go.
Okay. So I was kind of similar to Romina. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. So landlocked. Well, we had like the Great Lakes around us, but those are pretty cool, but it's not the ocean. But I actually started, I think I read a book on sharks when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And for some reason, I immediately got hooked. I was just like, I want to be a marine biologist. I want to go close to the ocean and do research. And it stuck with me all the way through high school. So I decided to come to Florida for undergrad to be close to the ocean. And I was also an athlete, so that took up a lot of my time. So in my undergrad, where I went to Florida Atlantic University, I did a semester where I only just did field work. So I did fish surveys, I did plant surveys, worked in the lab, worked in the field, got a little bit of taste of everything, and found out that my true passion, my true love is field work. So I like to be outside on boats, getting dirty, getting messy, my favorite thing to do. So afterwards, I actually ended up getting a job at a nature center, and where I currently work as well, been working there for about 4 years. I work with sea turtles. So it's another avenue in marine biology that I personally didn't expect I'd be going into, but I'm very happy that I took this path. And then when I got more into sharks is when I went into grad school. So I went to Nova Southeastern University, started helping with my advisor with tagging. So my advisor was Derek Burkholder, and did some tagging and stuff, and was just like, this is absolutely amazing. I love sharks, I love tagging, and got notice of a project that was going on in Belize concerning the effects of tourism on nurse sharks there. It actually had never really been studied in this particular area, and they were looking for a student that could come and help or create a research project there. So that's how I got into my research at Belize. And I didn't think I would be going into like the effects of tourism and conservation of sharks. I thought I would stay in more of the biology, but I actually really, really love learning about the different ways that humans interact with sharks and how we're affecting them and their behavior and how it goes all into their conservation. I could go on, but it's really cool, and I'm really glad that I took this pathway. And like everyone's pathways are different. I used to think that, oh, like I'm an athlete, I can't do anything until after I graduate, and I still ended up working with sharks. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Rose?
So I'm a little bit different than Romina and Carlee because I was always by the water. I grew up in I was born in Dominican Republic. I grew up in a small portside town in Germany, and I remember being 8 years old and telling my grandfather, who was a fisherman, who would always take me out with him on Sundays, like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. And I don't really think I knew what that meant yet. I didn't realize I was going to have to do this much math at the time I said it, but and I got a bachelor's degree in Germany in biotechnology, and it sort of cemented that I really wanted to do marine biology. So then I came to Florida, got another bachelor's degree in marine biology, and now I'm looking to start my PhD hopefully next year. I took a gap year this year, which kind of ended up working out with everything that happened with the pandemic to sort of just focus a little bit more on research without having classes and a whole bunch of other things to deal with. And then we kind of just got landlocked because nobody was allowed to actually work anymore in the university. But it's really weird because I kind of slipped into ecotoxicology accidentally. It was never something that was on my radar. I'd never thought about it. And me being silly, I asked someone who's teaching one of my classes, like, hey, you want to hire me? And they were like, do you want to be hired? Because I have a job. So it was kind of an accident, but I love sort of understanding things like how we as humans impact the environment, especially in a way that we don't necessarily think of. Like a lot of people don't necessarily think of fertilizers and pesticides, causing behavioral changes in predators or in prey species, and how that's going to, affect the population. So I kind of like looking at how we directly affect them and how they affect us in turn. So it's sort of one of the things I always tell people, like, never, like, try not to say no, especially like if you're young, like you never know where your passion lies. I would have never been able to tell you that this is what I love to do. And now I'm like, yeah, I want more. So, take opportunities and sort of explore different fields because you never know where you're going to end up, and it might be where you're meant to be. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, I also grew up in Germany. So I spent a lot of time, in Europe, where, the sea is nice, but not really the same as the Bahamas. I actually grew up, again, I was always interested in just like animals in the natural world. My interest didn't necessarily lie in sharks or marine biology, really, while I was growing up. My parents always tell stories about how I was a nightmare child, so I would just like collect frogs or collect freaking jellyfish and just put them in my rucksack and bring them home. So I was just obsessed with that kind of thing. But when I was a teenager, I kind of started watching more documentaries and kind of reading about, the kind of impacts that the humans were having. And it kind of shocked me a lot because the natural world that I loved just felt so distant from like the stuff I was seeing about overfishing and all these big kind of unmitigated bycatch problems. And so that kind of led me to do a bachelor's in zoology. I did my undergrad at University of Bristol in England, and I actually focused primarily on sensory ecology, which is really something that fascinates me because it's seeing the whole world from a perspective that just isn't human, which is something that it's very hard to really imagine, but it has a huge impact. We think that the way we do things is only really from one biased perspective. And that fascinated me, but I left undergrad kind of not knowing what to do with that fascination, to be honest. I took some other jobs. I just kind of worked around to see what I was interested in, and used the money I kind of earned in those jobs to take an internship here in Bimini. And that was when I first actually got to see the impact that humans were having in some ways here. The big dredge channels that they had and the big hotel developments that are right on a really pristine marine environment. And that really pushed me to try and, make that my career and try and kind of contribute to that. So I went back to the University of York in the UK and did a master's degree in marine environmental management, which was trying to apply that science and zoology understanding to policy and management. And I did my thesis with the lab as well on a big collaborative project, which was basically taking all the data that we had to try and understand how lemon sharks were moving across their life histories, but also how that was changing in relation to the hotel developments. So that lent itself to then my PhD project that I developed with my supervisors at Exeter, which is primarily trying to understand the role of sound, which again, kind of like Rose was saying, is one of those things that you don't necessarily think might have a big impact on an animal, but it definitely can do. And I'm interested in seeing how both the removal of sound by removing habitats that are very noisy like mangroves, and also the introduction of man-made noise might then go ahead and influence the shark community here. But yeah, like everyone has said, the other thing is that I at no point during my whole journey have ever thought like, yeah, this is the path I'm taking, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. There have been loads of opportunities that at the time I felt was, you know, I'd missed out on something massive. And I thought that that was the one thing, and I either got rejected from something or I didn't take it, and I thought I was going to regret it. But it does find a way, and if you're really passionate about something, there are ways that you can you know, pursue it and build upon it. So I'm very happy with how things have ended up so far anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And being a woman in marine science, the way that I found my path, actually, I did not grow up around the water. Growing up in Jersey City, New Jersey, I was an inner city kid, and I didn't go to the beach actually until like later in my life. I never dove. I was a swimmer. I grew up being an athlete as a swimmer, but the only nature that I realistically knew was just going on hikes and so forth. So I actually stumbled upon marine science when I was visiting family in South Carolina, and Coastal Carolina University had an open house, and I wound up going to the campus to see what it was about. And I just all of a sudden became interested. And I was like, marine science, this is a field. I love animals. I don't want to be a veterinarian. I love water. So let me combine the two of them actually. And it was within my first year that with Dr. Dan Abel that I was introduced to sharks and the juveniles of the Nguyen Bay. And first shark that I tagged, I was set for life. And so I just continued. And I wasn't sure still even at that time, like, what do I want to do with it? I didn't come from a family that went to college. I was first generation to go to college. So to go to graduate school and so forth was seemingly unheard of in my family. And, you know, like Clemency and others were talking about also, you know, trying to find the money and pay my way through school because I just wanted to learn more and continue. And it wasn't until I was down in Florida, actually, with my graduate studies and working with Erasmus and the shark program that they have there and bringing students out on the boat that I was offered a position to teach. And that was the first time I ever thought about it. And I was just like, what? I don't want to teach kids. I don't want to be in a classroom. But in all honesty, the kids at that age, when I went to the interview and I started talking to the kids, I was like, these kids are in the same position. They don't know what they want to do. I just need to inspire them and maybe they'll get into it. And I've been hooked since. Like, I'm a lab person too. I'm a field person too. You know, going out to the lab and doing research out there. I try like every break, running myself, you know, continually. My dream is to continue through my PhD, but I just giving my heart and pouring my heart out to my kids is just, it keeps me going realistically. So, and thank you again for, you know, all of you here who are inspiring them right now because they're tuning in. So I want to go to our next question. And our next question that's posed here is, what is one of the biggest challenges that you face in your field at the moment? And we would like you to be as honest as you would like to be.
So I can start. I think it's a challenge that I face personally, and it's a challenge that the field faces, which is no money. It's lack of funding. Because it's not easy to sometimes make a case for a fish that people don't see. It's difficult to get a lot of people excited about fishes that are somewhere in the sea and you can't really see them. You can see an elephant, right? You can create a rapport with a panda. We all love pandas. Yeah. But it's not the same if it's a grouper or a snapper. So I think, especially my field, because I spend a lot of time in the lab and I work in genomics, which is expensive. So it becomes quite expensive with all the reagents, with all the chemicals, with everything we need to do. So we need good funding, and we need funding that is continuous. It's not just 1 year, 2 years, you do a little project and then you're done. These things, especially now in the context of climate change, where all species are moving, or majority of species are moving. You need to monitor them, because you need to know which ones are going to be what we call the winners and the losers. And then you have to decide if you need to do something about the losers or not. So this is a challenge that the field as a whole has. And now with COVID, with all this pandemic, it is quite obvious that a lot of funding will be diverted out of science into epidemiology and into society, which makes sense because this is an emergency that we have to deal with now. But biodiversity is an emergency we have to deal with now too. So it becomes a bit frustrating when we should be doing research and instead I'm trying to find as much funding as I can so I can do my job.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your honesty. Carlee?
Yeah. So lately I really haven't been like in research, like right now after I graduated, take a little break. But a big challenge that I guess I've been facing just in general is trying to get out into the field as well. Like Romina was saying, the pandemic has definitely put a lot of things on hold, and field work has been on hold for very long, since the beginning of the pandemic. So being able to go out and help some of my colleagues on their tagging trips has been, it's sad for me because I really like getting out into the field, helping people tag and everything like that. But that's definitely been a big challenge. And then even kind of just going back into near the end of my graduate career, just trying to get through everything while in a pandemic, even though like you're at home all the time, it's kind of mentally that is very hard. And like I know like a lot of the kids were experiencing the same things, just having to be stuck at home. We students were also kind of going a little crazy, just having to be stuck at home and trying to me personally trying to finish my thesis. It was very, very, very hard. Even though I was home all the time. It's just that mental health is definitely a big thing right now, and making sure in school, especially undergrad, grad school, high school, all the all the schools, just make sure mental health is kept in check, because that is a big thing for just getting through this field, because it's a lot of fun, but a lot of the like mental energy you put into it, make sure you're taking care of yourself. So
Thank you so much. I could not agree. I could not agree more. It's hard. We're remote teaching right now, so getting the kids field work. I mean, for myself, like I love it, but also getting my students out into the field is a huge thing. And you're right. A lot of us also, you know, we're stuck at home. So mental health is so important right now. It is. Rose?
So the question was, what challenges we faced, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Clearly, memory is a challenge I face. I'm gonna bring it back actually a little bit. It kind of lines up with what Romina was saying, lack of funding. Just because I feel like there is a lack of exposure for students, especially at like the high school level or at the undergraduate level. A lot of people actually don't get to go out and get many experiences until they get into their graduate program, but they can't get into a graduate program because they lack the experience that they weren't able to get in undergraduate. So that's sort of been a very big thing for me. I was very lucky. I was one of the very fortunate people who got a paying job in undergraduate, so I was able to get my experience and not have to take out, you know, thousands of dollars in student loans and or starve. So, but I also acknowledge that it is a problem in this field. You know, everybody hates to hear it, but it's a problem. You know, you got to invest in the undergraduate students to sort of get decent PhD students that are going to care about what they're doing and that, you know, are passionate about it. But then you also have to motivate the high school students and the middle school students to want to get into this field in the first place, because, you know, it's not always all sunshine and rainbows. It's not always sipping, you know, a nice cool beverage on a boat, you know, it's the nitty gritty, but I think it's sort of the things that students need to see like on a continuous basis. Because in my opinion, we can all work so very hard to try to fix some of the issues that we have now. But if the future generation isn't motivated to continue the work, then it's all for nothing. So I definitely think that funding is a big challenge within the field, and that we need to do better to sort of educate everybody and to give everybody that hands-on training and expose everybody to the different fields of marine science. Because it's always funny, I always hear, you know, growing up, everyone always told me, marine science is super competitive. You're never going to make it. You have a better chance of being an NBA player. I'm like, okay, I'll take the chance. But the thing that they don't tell you is that marine science is such a broad field. There is not one thing that encompasses anything. If it exists, you can study it in the ocean, and that makes you a marine scientist. So, you know, it's not necessarily that it's competitive. It's just, I think that there's a very clear lack of funding for it, which sort of prevents everybody from getting an equal shot at it.
Thank you. Thank you for the honesty. And yeah, I mean, even down again at the middle and the high school level, like I didn't have it in high school. And, you know, to think about it, dealing with the equity portion, now making those experiences available to all children.
Yeah, I definitely agree with pretty much everything that's been brought up so far. I think that the challenges that we face increasingly and kind of across all aspects. And building on some of the stuff that was said before, I know that a few of us actually also work in global change. And I know that also a lot of my colleagues back in Exeter work on the same thing. And we also increasingly feel that it's very hard to work in that field and not feel like a hypocrite a lot of the time. It's actually really hard to work in global change and climate change and not feel like by traveling to field locations, by, you know, attending conferences internationally, by doing things like that, that you're also not contributing to the very problem that you're trying to solve. I think that's a hard problem to overcome, both on a personal level and in the field, and even mentally, like trying to take on the kind of anxiety and the feeling of like just the hopelessness and despair at what climate change is happening and the other aspects of global change, while at the same time trying to do a good thing is quite taxing sometimes. I don't necessarily think that there's one way to tackle it. I think that you can make small changes yourself. You can try and acknowledge that you can't be perfect and maybe try a little bit to, you know, attend conferences online, which is maybe one of the things that the pandemic has shown, that we can do some things remotely without necessarily having to incur the costs that we were before. Of course, there's huge benefits to doing these things in person as well, but where applicable, it could make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I think that's also a challenge that we face, is not only acknowledging that, but also finding ways that we can relay that and communicate that, like you said, to the next generation and to other scientists and to the general public in a way that makes everyone want a better world and you know, implement the kind of change that we do need to see.
Thank you. So that brings us to our next question. What is, oh, I am so sorry. What innovation in your field most excites you? What is one innovation that most excites you in your field?
So we are doing whole genome sequencing now, which I know sounds really geeky, but it's like trying to read a book. But in the beginning, you only had a few pages and no index. So you kind of made a story, right? And as the technology has been advancing, we've been adding pages and more pages and more pages to this book. And now we can actually have the full book with an index and an interpreter. So what we can answer now, the questions we can answer now for species that are not humans, that are not a fly like Drosophila, but for real life applications, it's a whole new level. It's you can see, I love it. It's fantastic. I really, like, please give me money because I really want to do this for all marine species, especially the ones that we eat, because I work with fisheries, and normally there's a lot of money in fisheries, but not so much for what I want to do. So trying to understand how these animals evolved, what is their adaptive capacity? So can they adapt to climate change? Will they be okay? Or do we need to have some things going on? Yeah, it's a whole new world for me. I'm really keen.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, we can see in your face that you get super excited. Carlee?
Yeah, so I actually just read recently. What I do is a lot of like human interactions with sharks and like human perspectives as well. But there was a paper that came out recently that showed how sharks are perceived in media. This might not be like an innovation, but this is like really interesting to me and something new that I learned. But basically, they found over, I can't remember, but they looked at over like hundreds and hundreds of articles, and they found that most of the articles, like 60% of them, had a very like negative type view towards sharks, and also a lot of them focused on like issues that don't really encompass the whole conservation sorry, my words are gone. The whole conservation aspect of sharks, there we go. And also a lot of different articles like to put emphasis on sharks that they say are in trouble, like, oh, like this shark is just this species is doing horrible, like they're going extinct, blah, blah, but in reality, that specific species is either just vulnerable or it's least concern. So a lot of the media focus has been away from sharks that actually need help in the conservation aspect, but they tend to focus on big name sharks like the great hammerhead, even though they're endangered, but they're not as in trouble as a lot of different other species of sharks, or like the white shark. Everyone knows about the white shark now because it comes up in a lot of different things. But I just thought it was really cool just seeing overall how media, and not just like on the news, but just specific articles that come up like on your Facebook news feeds, things like that. And just seeing how they focus on different things and just breaking down like what types of things people are getting fed misinformation or just like correct information about sharks. So I just thought that was really cool.
Thank you. Yes, fake news, horrible problem. Rose?
It's actually funny. I'm going to piggyback a little bit off what Carlee just said, because I used to be terrified of sharks. Like, terrified. I was like, nope, not going into the ocean. It's not happening. One of them's going to eat me like I'm a piece of sushi. And I know I'm delicious, but not that delicious. So someone finally convinced me to go out, and we went snorkeling, and I got into the water, and there was like 5 sharks around me, and I'm like, this is so cool. I love these things. Look at how cool they look. So you can change when you're older. Just, just a tidbit, don't let the fear stop you from doing something, because you never know if you're going to have a moment and you're just like, this is so awesome. Like, just love it. So but one innovation that I'm actually pretty excited about in my field especially is I love looking at how combined things will affect things. So when I was actually putting together my entire proposal for my graduate school, I sort of found a very big knowledge gap that there's not a lot of information about like metal contaminants and how those are going to act in effect with climate change, how those two things combined are going to affect them. So we know a lot of stuff about climate change and we know a lot of stuff about metals, but there was very, very few studies, and they were all like hypothetical studies that show that climate change can make certain species more susceptible to being polluted by metals. So I'm actually really excited to look more into that for my graduate studies, because of the fact that I think it's like such a cool concept where it's like, here's 2 things that we're doing to mess up the planet. This is why it's going to be a giant catastrophe. I'm actually, like, it sounds terrible, but I'm actually really excited to study it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of those feelings as well. Every time I see that like sharks are very, stressed or respond differently to like anthropogenic noise, I you have to kind of balance it somewhere between being really excited that you're seeing it and also just horribly concerned that you're seeing it. So yeah, I understand that. In terms of innovation in my field, I don't think it's necessarily like new innovation, but the kind of avenue of technology that I think is really useful and hopefully will be very important in the future is having remote technology or having the ability to monitor environments remotely without having to physically be there. It kind of plays back into what we've been saying about kind of COVID and not physically being able to be present. It allows us to be able to monitor environments when we can't get there. But also interestingly, it allows us to monitor environments when we can't be there for other reasons too. So in extreme weather events, for example, or if we don't have funding for a lot of people or a permanent stay, we can sometimes, fund monitoring stations that can get us a lot of information passively. So hydrophones now are being used to listen to soundscapes, and it's not just what animals are there anymore, but it's listening out for predation events and knowing that predation is happening in certain areas. It's listening out for full habitat quality indicators and being able to assess the health of a whole ecosystem just by listening to it. And I think that's really exciting. And equally, one thing that I just love, and again, it's been around for a long time, but I think it's developing so interestingly, is the ability for the public and people to get involved directly with science through technology. So things like apps now where you can identify animals and you can upload anything you see, people can help you identify it, and then that can be directly used by scientists to understand, migration paths or, which areas invasive species are moving into. There's even things now where you can like take a picture or hold your phone near a fish and it will tell you what species it is. And that's not just interesting on a personal level, but if you're a government and you can't have fisheries observers everywhere, but you have fishermen that can directly be logging exactly the species they're finding, where they're finding it, how many they're catching, that obviously has huge implications. I think NOAA actually even have an app that monitors like geomagnetism. You can just have it running in the background and it contributes to surveys that just understand the Earth's magnetic field and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's really exciting. And I think it's something that also will get a lot of people who might not already be involved in science really interested and excited about it. So yeah, I'm sure Leanne, you're involved in that thing anyway by like communicating it, but yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And yeah, so like Rose was saying, getting excited by the weird stuff and the horror, like, evolution of viruses is horrifying, but amazing. This little microorganism can do that. And what Clem was saying, yeah, I mean, look at us here right now. None of my students, none of the world would know any of you existed possibly if it wasn't for now social media and these Zooms. These Zooms are amazing because now we're, for free, giving this access to all these students in different places of the world and so forth. So we have some questions that are in the Q&A and I want to make sure that we address them. One, if you each don't mind sharing, what is one hardship that you've had to overcome? And how did you do it?
Do I go first again?
If you would like.
Okay. So there's two things. One is that English is not my native language. And that makes a big difference because it was quite tough in the beginning. And in Portugal, we do have English for a lot of years in school, but you have a very academic English. And when you move to a different country with a different language, it's not the same. So that was a bit tough. And to this day, I still struggle, especially when you have to write papers, because I'm not as fluent as someone with my education is. So my colleagues that are native speakers, they get it much easier than I do for sure. How did I overcome it? Well, you work a lot. Yeah, reading, writing, and reading widely, right? Not just science, but reading science in particular, because another thing that I think a lot of native speakers don't understand it is we build our sentences differently according to your mother language. So the way I speak in Portuguese is not the way I speak in English, and that requires a lot of gymnastics, mental gymnastics to get this working. So now I normally say that I got to be mediocre in two languages because I'm losing my Portuguese and I never got super good at English. And the other one is that this life of an academic requires moving a lot. And you get a lot of friends from a lot of places, but your friends are in a lot of places. So you always a little bit not where you're supposed to be. And that takes a toll after a while. So in the beginning when you're younger, I know I don't look like it, but I'm 36. So when you're younger and it's nicer, and as you get older, it becomes a bit more difficult. How do I overcome that? Well, I need a permanent job. Which I'll get.
Oh, Romina. Thank you, Romina. I hear you. Totally agree. It does. It takes a mental toll on you, leaving friends, and you have a lot, you build relationships because you've gone through maybe hurricanes, you've gone through these traumatic, experiences with individuals in the field or in a lab or, at a point in time of your life, and then you go away from them. And it takes a toll, especially these days. Carlee.
Yes, I've been sitting here trying to figure out which hardship I'm gonna talk about. But yeah, so in grad school is rough, but it's rough for everyone. So, but basically, like I had a pretty hard time like believing in myself that I was a scientist doing real science. That was like it's weird to say, like looking back on it, because it's like, oh, like I've done all these things, and then but in the moment you're kind of just like, oh, like I'm just, the only reason I know these things is because I'm like reading different papers and just getting information. Like I'm not really producing anything, or I'm not contributing to science and things like that. But that also goes into mental health. And one of the things that I did to overcome it was, one, I sought help. So I went and saw a therapist or counselor. School counseling is free if you go to the school. And then another thing is just like reminding yourself of things that you've done. Kind of like just a lot more self-positive talk. So like I passed this test, or I just read this new paper and I actually understood it. Like I'm going to give myself some brownie points. And also like just anything you do, like I just did some field work that's adding to my experience. Like I am molding myself as a scientist. And that was definitely a hard thing for me. And also being a minority in this field, like I was always the only Black girl in every single thing I did. And that's mentally very hard, because you're just like, I'm alone, and like, like no one really understands me. But I was fortunate to be able to find a community of different Black women scientists, and also shark scientists. That's how we made MISS. I'm repping MISS right now, minorities in shark science. But yeah, that was definitely a hard thing for me in grad school, is trying to fit in the science community, because I felt a little on the outside, didn't feel like I contributed anything, or it's, what do they call it? Imposter syndrome is very real. But yeah, just finding a community of like-minded individuals, going to seek help with therapists, counseling, and also just reminding yourself of like the things that you've done. Like I got into grad school, like that's a big thing in itself. So just throughout your journey, it's really important to remind yourself of the things that you've overcome, the experiences that you have, and just reminding yourself that like your journey is your journey. Don't look at anyone else's, because that just stresses you out more. But yeah, so that is my heart.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Rose?
So I think the biggest challenge till this day that I've had is that I had an absolute monster of a mentor. So I had, I started here working with a master's student, and then she had graduated, and the person that came, I had been at the lab for 2 years already. You know, the previous PI who built this lab from the ground up, basically he retired. So I was like the last man standing from like the OG crew that sort of built this lab up. We did a lot of work for the BP oil spill back when it happened. So this lab was very established, and this new person, she came in, and basically her first words to me when she came into the lab, like, you need to understand, I have a PhD, I'm up here. You are an undergraduate student, you are down here. And I was just like, okay, sorry. You know, and I was very timid back then. I never wanted to sort of step on anybody's toes. And for 2 years, I kind of constantly had to deal with her belittling me constantly. Like everything was wrong. If I left, you know, if I didn't do something to the millimeter the way that she wanted to do it, she would basically sit me down every Friday and tell me she's going to fire me, even though I technically didn't work for her. So that was a whole other thing, you know. And I think sort of the breaking point was at some point I was working 70-hour weeks. I did not have a single day off. You know, mental health is very important. And at some point, I think I kind of just cracked because I pulled over to the side of the road on my way to the lab and just started bawling in the car. And at some point I was like, I can't keep doing this. You know, it was a thing that really made me want to quit the field, where I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this, because I have someone with a PhD constantly calling me an idiot. You know, like Carlee was saying, you don't necessarily always feel like you belong when you're a minority in STEM, because you look around and everyone, you know, most of them are just white men, and you're kind of just like, well, I'm not a white man, so should I even be here? And then you have someone telling you that you shouldn't be there. So like it wreaks havoc on your mental health. And it sort of turned into a thing where I had to go above everybody else and go like all the way to the top. And I was like, look, I'm having this problem. I need you to fix it or I'm quitting. But I'm the only person left that actually knows how this facility runs. So just keep that in mind. And it's sort of, she actually ended up quitting 2 weeks later, because I'm assuming she got called into a meeting with a lot of people and it turned into like some giant catastrophe. And she actually ended up leaving. And it took that for me to realize, like, yes, you want to be collaborative and you want to be agreeable and you want to be reasonable with people, but you also need to know when to stand your ground, because there are unfortunately some people that are very toxic in this field that will try to put you down, and you kind of just have to stand your ground and stand up to them, because times are changing. So, you know, if you don't like it, sorry, you're on your way out anyways. You're like 80 years old, you know, you're a dinosaur. It's time for you to make way for newer people. And as long as we understand that that's not okay, you know, it's not an okay mentality to have, I think we'll be okay, because a lot of the younger people that are seeing are more open-minded, they are more helpful. And a lot of this elitism is slowly starting to fade away. We kind of just have to deal with the remnants that are there. But it's sort of something that I tell myself constantly, like, I don't ever want to turn into that person, because I don't ever want a student to feel that way. You know, I want to inspire someone. I want someone to come to me with their problems and who I can help, you know, set them on their journey. So it was sort of a learning experience for me, but it was very humbling in the sense that I did take away a lot from it, and I did grow as a scientist and as a person, because now I know what I don't want to be.
Thank you. Thank you for that honesty. Yeah. And thank you. Clem?
Yeah, I would definitely agree to the extent that I do think that mental health, or trying to, you know, feel like you are a scientist, is something that is hard to overcome. And sometimes the culture can be quite difficult to integrate into, in terms of just, yeah, feeling like you are making, I don't know, I just think it is quite a very opinionated sometimes environment. I'd say that probably one of the biggest hardships that I personally have had to go through in order to get here is probably financial. And I know that is funding both for research, but also just personally financial. It's hard in marine science to find a way to do it without having to be involved a lot of times in things that are expensive. A lot of internships are expensive, and a lot of travel, especially if you're from the UK and you're trying to do something abroad, is really expensive. And there's not a lot of facilities out there to, you know, for young people to be able to take initiatives to get there. I initially kind of overcame this actually by just trying to do any research that I could that didn't necessarily involve doing big internships. I volunteered a lot of my time to lab projects that were database, that were remote working, that were watching videos and trying to contribute to projects that way. And I still learned a lot of valuable things without having to make those big commitments. But again, I still missed out on some of those fieldwork experiences by doing so. I took a lot of my time to work other jobs in order to kind of get there. And especially considering that I still have a lot of privilege coming into this, it was still very hard for me. And I ended up even going on like UK TV game shows to try and get money to like fund my internships. And in the end, I ended up coming to the lab. I took my time and picked something that, I thought would be beneficial for me and would actually end up being valuable. And I'm lucky that I ended up actually getting a lot out of that. But I do think that it's important to kind of take your time and to choose opportunities that work for you, and to also try and explore other options that aren't necessarily doing fieldwork internships are really useful, but it's not the only way you can get experience. It's not the only way you can meet people. And I do think, again, culture is kind of changing to try and facilitate people to gain experience in other ways. And yeah, it's important not to think that that's the be all and end all of gaining experience in this field. And hopefully, yeah, things will start to move in the right direction soon too.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, everybody, again, for everything that you're sharing. And agree, just to echo and continue what you're saying, I feel that. And being as a teacher, that's something that I continue still struggling with. The fact that that means that I'm not a scientist because I'm not represented by a lab, because I don't have that title. What place do I have? And I still feel that when I go on projects and when I, collaborate with colleagues, it's like, well, what university do you represent? Like, you're not a doctor and so forth. So as I said in the beginning, I want to get it because I still have that mentality that, I'm not good enough because I'm not actively doing that.
Can I just say?
Yes.
I'm a doctor because I am, and the main technician in my lab is leaps and bounds smarter than I am, and leaps and bounds better than I am, because that's what she does. And to use a doctorate to make yourself bigger, no, you're not bigger. They just gave you a piece of paper. Sorry, a doctorate is awesome. Everyone should get one, but so I'm sorry, Rose. I cannot stand this. I hate it when people do that. I'll mute myself now.
No, I thank you for that. I love to go back to you, Rose. Go ahead.
Some of the most brilliant people I have ever met do not have PhDs. They didn't want to do like independent research. So they were like, why should I waste 6 years of my life eating ramen, living off of, pennies if I can make decent money doing exactly what I want to do? Like, the only people realistically that are out here constantly getting PhDs is if you know that you want to do independent research. If that's not your goal, then I don't see what the issue is. I know so many people who have started NGOs, who work in government, who work in the industry, that never went and got their PhD, but still earn more money than people with a PhD. Just saying.
Thank you for that. We have other questions, and I don't know if we'll have time for all of them, but I'd love to highlight some amazing and positive things. So I'd love to hear what your best experiences in your career are. Romina, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can. Okay, as I said earlier, I come from a small town in Portugal, and I know you probably don't really know where Portugal is. It's the country next to Spain. People tend to think we are Spain. We're not. We've been there for a while. But my job allowed me the world. It gave me the world. I've been to so many countries doing what I love to do and talking about my work and doing research and doing field work and meeting all these people that coming from a small town in Portugal, no ways would I have been friends with a brilliant squid scientist from Japan. It's just, that for me is one of the best things of my job. And it makes me happy to go to work.
Thank you. That is a highlight. It is meeting people from all around the world and working with people from all around the world. Carlee, would you like to share?
Yeah. So specifically for my project, I was able to go to Belize, and I lived there for 2 months. And that was by far the highlight of my career so far, my young career. But just being able to travel and also learn from the perspectives of the natives there, like the people who actually like their life is basically the ocean. Like just being able to learn about how they use the ocean and how they view the ocean different from how like people in the States might view the ocean, just Americans in general. And it gave me a different outlook on just like different perspectives of how people view the ocean. And when I was there, I always say this is like my favorite experience to date, but I was in my study area, and it's a shallow like seagrass, 5 feet maybe of water, bunch of nurse sharks swimming around, and all of a sudden this random great hammerhead decided to like come chill with us, and it was the craziest thing ever. It's like 9 feet long at least. And it's just giant great hammerhead. But it was my first time in the water with like a big shark like that, and like one of the big ones with like nice teeth. And it was just like a very humbling experience, because it also kind of shows me, I felt like a shrimp. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm this little tiny thing. This thing could easily eat me, but it's not going to. So it's just that was definitely a highlight of my career, just being in Belize, being able to have that experience, and just doing research abroad is my favorite thing. So.
Thank you. Rose, would you like to share?
So by far the coolest thing I have done in my baby career. I was part of an expedition last summer, and we went to the Arctic for 21 days. So we were on this giant icebreaker for 21 days in the middle of the Arctic, and it was the most surreal experience. It sort of humbles you. It humbles you when you're like this tiny speck and you're surrounded by ice and water, and you're like, wow. It's a very weird thing to explain. Like you wake up and you just see all this ice. And what was really sad to me was the fact that we had taken ice samples and we found microplastics in the ice samples. And, you know, it's like you're looking out at this ice from the boat and you're like, it's so pristine, it's clean. This is one of the few places in the world that's still, you know, very much so untouched by all of the stuff that we as humans have just put out there. And then you realize it's false. But sort of the one thing that I really took away from that trip, it completely changed my mentality to how I see communities in the ocean, because I had the opportunity to work with some of the indigenous members of their communities. They were on board the ship with us. And, you know, it was really, really surreal when you have me from a tiny island in the Caribbean and, you know, this person who's from like the northernmost part of the world, basically. And we sat down and we found out that we have so many similarities, you know, because of the fact that we are dependent on the ocean. We basically have the same lives, except I'm always hot and he's always cold, you know? It was things like, you know, like climate change is affecting us, even though we are the ones that contribute the least amount to climate change. Like pollution is affecting us, even though we are reliant on nature. And it sort of gave me a very deep understanding for the communities that are depending on our environment and how we should care more about the environment because of that, but how it's a symbiosis. We need the ocean and the ocean needs us. It's not one or the other. And it's really funny when you just see people from different walks of life and we all can agree upon that, you know, the ocean calls us. She's our home, so.
Well said. Thank you for that. Clem?
Yeah, this is going to sound really boring actually, but I think the moment that I felt kind of the most excited about my career was actually when I defended my master's. I think that was the one time when, you know, you really kind of get challenged. And I think that everyone still experiences a lot of nervousness or fear before doing something like that. And you're doubting yourself constantly, but the feeling of actually getting grilled and knowing what you're talking about is actually really great. And when you kind of get to that point where you have people who are obviously proud of what you've done and they believe in what you've done, that to me was kind of the moment when I felt like I kind of had made a bit of a transition from just, you know, someone else who had gone through undergrad and was interested in the environment to actually kind of proving or showing that to myself I could make a difference, I could do this, and I was capable of this. So I think personally that was kind of the biggest experience. But I, like Carlee, there have been plenty of kind of small humbling experiences, especially out here in Bimini, when you just kind of also get those moments of remembering and realizing where you are. And a lot of the time we're really busy here and we're constantly doing things, even if it's not directly involving sharks in the marine environment. And even just in, I think it was in August when we were preparing for a hurricane, we were going out and collecting a lot of our receivers just to bring them in, make sure they were protected. And, you know, you're rushing around, you're so busy. And while we were doing that, we just had a huge, beautiful, probably about 2.5 meter tiger shark just cruised straight by our boat. She hung around and she just swam around us. And it, again, is one of those humbling moments when you realize you have to stop for a second and think like, yeah, I'm actually here, I'm actually experiencing this. And you have to be really grateful that you were ever given that opportunity.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank all of the attendees for joining us and listening. Feel free to go ahead and take yourself off mute. I would love to just hear everyone say thank you, goodbye. I loved hearing all of you. I loved talking to all of you and so forth. I just would like to, you know, extend again, anytime if you'd like to talk to the students, or anytime, you know, if you want to continue work, we'd love to host you. Thank you again, so many individuals who attended with us. I want to give a little shout out to our next talk I'll be hosting, Dr. Toby Deli Engel. Actually at FIT is going to be talking. So we're continuing the power of women in marine science. Toby's going to be talking about what DNA can reveal about the secret lives of baby sharks. And just as an FYI, if you missed any of our previous ones, they're all of our panelists for today. But if you've missed any of our others, they are located on our Sharks for Kids website. Definitely check it out. They're on YouTube. We have Instagram, Facebook, etc. All right. And at this time, I need to go to my next class. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again.
Thank you for
Thank you.
us.
It was really nice to meet you, Paul.
Yes, it was so great to connect with everybody, and be well during this time, COVID and otherwise, mental health. I think that's one thing that everyone echoed really, is mental health. And I loved what you were saying, Rose, about this symbiosis, you know, nature and the ocean needs us and we need it. And we need to keep this in mind at this time. So be safe.
Answer anybody's questions, they can email us, right?
Yes, actually, so I have there are some other questions actually, and most of them are from my students. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be amazing. I can send them your way if you would like to share.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
I had a lot of good questions in there. So
They did.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We try to inspire. Thank you so much. Thank you. Virtual hug.
You meet everybody.
Yes. Y'all are awesome.